She cannot even care for herself. My stepmother. Vivian wept dramatically in the courtroom, clutching a lace handkerchief to her chest. I remained perfectly still at the defense table. Magistrate Harrison slowly lowered his glasses, peering down from the bench. He looked directly at Vivian and asked a question that would change everything. Did you honestly believe we would not verify the records? Vivian completely froze. The fake tears instantly vanished from her face. Her attorney gasped and dropped his pen. Behind me in the gallery, I could hear my white sister-in-law Chloe loudly whispering to anyone who would listen. I tried to help Kendra, but she is completely out of her mind. She is dangerous. My name is Kendra, and I am 32 years old. What Vivian and Chloe did not realize was that dragging me into a probate court in Chicago to claim I was mentally unstable was the biggest mistake of their lives. They thought I was just a grieving daughter they could easily manipulate to steal my late father's estate. They forgot one crucial detail. I am a senior forensic accountant for one of the largest financial firms in the country. I do not scream, and I do not cry. I follow the paper trail and I destroy my enemies with receipts. Before I tell you exactly how I dismantled their entire lives, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. If you have ever had a toxic family member underestimate your intelligence, hit the like button and subscribe. You will definitely want to hear how this trap snapped shut. The courtroom was thick with tension. Vivian stood at the podium looking like a cornered animal. She wore her Sunday best, a navy blue suit she usually reserved for the front pew of our community church. She had spent the last 3 months painting me as a manic depressive woman who was burning through my inheritance. She brought a binder full of fabricated evidence, hoping the judge would grant her a full conservatorship. She wanted total control over my life and my bank accounts, just like Britney Spears, but without the pop music. Magistrate Harrison slammed his gavel, demanding order. "We are going to take a brief 20-minute recess," he announced, his voice echoing against the oak-paneled walls. "Counsel, I suggest you use this time to speak with your client about the penalties for perjury in my courtroom." He stood up and walked into his chambers. I calmly gathered my files and placed them into my leather briefcase. My lawyer gave me a subtle nod before stepping away to make a phone call. I walked out the heavy double doors into the brightly lit hallway of the courthouse. The marble floors clicked under my heels. I just wanted a moment of quiet before the next round of battle. But peace is a luxury you do not get when dealing with my family. Before I could even reach the water fountain, Chloe blocked my path. She was wearing a designer dress paid for by my brother Marcus, who was currently hiding in the men's restroom to avoid conflict. Chloe always played the role of the ultimate white savior in our family. She loved to act like she was elevating us, but her microaggressions were constant and exhausting. She reached into her oversized designer tote bag and pulled out a thick, crisp envelope. She shoved it directly into my chest, forcing me to take it. "What is this, Chloe?" I asked, keeping my voice completely level. "It is the bill, Kendra," she sneered, crossing her arms. "Somebody had to clean up the absolute disaster you left at the family estate. You completely trashed the place during your little manic episode last week. I had to hire a professional biohazard crew and an antique restoration specialist to fix the damage you caused. You are a complete mess and you need serious help. I am just trying to support Marcus through this tragedy." I opened the envelope and pulled out a perfectly printed invoice. The total at the bottom was exactly $45,000. It was an absurd amount of money for a cleaning service. I looked at the letterhead and immediately recognized the name of the company. It was a shell corporation registered to Chloe's maiden name. She was not just trying to have me declared legally insane, she was actively trying to extort me right outside the courtroom doors. I looked up from the fraudulent invoice and met her arrogant gaze. She expected me to break down crying or start yelling so she could point to my reaction as proof of my instability. Instead, I simply smiled at her and gently folded the paper back into the envelope. I held the crisp envelope out, offering it back to her. "I am not paying this, Chloe," I said, keeping my voice perfectly even. In fact, I am not paying for anything your little shell company claims to have done. If you want this money, you can take it up with my lawyers. Or better yet, submit it directly to the Internal Revenue Service as fraudulent business income. Chloe scoffed, slapping my hand away so the envelope fell to the marble floor. You are so ungrateful, Kendra. Honestly, it is exhausting trying to elevate this family. You all have this ghetto mentality where you just want to hoard your little inheritances and fight each other. I am the only one trying to bring some class to the Washington name. I am trying to preserve the estate so Marcus can have the future he deserves. But you just want to tear it all down because you cannot handle your own mental health issues. I watched her face flush with indignant rage. The sheer audacity of this woman standing in a courthouse, weaponizing my race and my grief while simultaneously trying to steal from me was almost impressive. Before I could respond, the heavy wooden door of the men's restroom creaked open. My stepbrother Marcus stepped out, wiping his sweaty palms on his tailored suit pants. He looked like a man walking to his own execution. Marcus Handel? Your sister Chloe snapped, not even looking at him. She is being completely irrational again. Marcus walked over, refusing to meet my eyes. He looked down at the envelope on the floor and sighed heavily. Kendra, please. He mumbled, his voice trembling slightly. Just sign the conservatorship papers. Let Vivian handle the accounts. We can put all of this behind us today. You will not have to worry about the bills or the estate taxes. You can just stay in your apartment and relax. Do it to save us the embarrassment of a public trial. Mom is inside crying her eyes out. Do you really want the whole church congregation reading about our family drama in the local paper? I stared at my brother. He was 34 years old, yet he still let his mother and his wife pull his strings like a cheap marionette. Embarrassment. I echoed, tasting the word on my tongue. You are worried about embarrassment, Marcus. You are standing here trying to have your completely sane sister declared legally incompetent, so you can drain our father's trust fund, and you think I am the one bringing shame to this family. Chloe stepped forward, her heels clicking aggressively on the stone. He is right, Kendra. You need help. Ever since your father passed, you have been out of control, moving money around, locking us out of the family home, changing the alarm codes. It is erratic behavior, and frankly, it is dangerous. We are doing this because we love you. We are trying to protect you from yourself. Her fake sympathy was nauseating. She tilted her head, giving me that practiced condescending smile she used whenever she wanted to play the victim. It was the same smile she wore at my father's funeral when she loudly told all his business partners that she was taking over the estate management because the rest of us were too emotional to handle it. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my smartphone. I did not raise my voice. I did not break eye contact. I just calmly unlocked the screen and opened my photo gallery. You want to talk about erratic behavior, Chloe? I asked quietly. Let us talk about erratic behavior. Let us talk about my father's vintage gold Rolex, the one he wore every single day for 20 years. The one that mysteriously vanished from his bedside table the very night he died. Vivian swore the paramedics must have stolen it. Marcus interjected quickly, sweat beading on his forehead. We filed a police report, Kendra. You know this. I know Vivian filed a report, I replied. My eyes locked onto Chloe. But I also know that paramedics do not drive a white Range Rover with custom vanity plates, and they certainly do not park that Range Rover outside of a shady pawn shop on the south side of the city 2 days after my father passed away. I turned my phone screen around so they could both see it clearly. It was a high-definition photograph. In the frame was Chloe's pristine white SUV parked directly in front of Fast Cash Pawn. And stepping out of the driver's side door, wearing oversized sunglasses and holding my father's distinct gold watch, was Chloe. The blood instantly drained from Chloe's face. She opened her mouth to speak, but no sound came out. Marcus stared at the glowing screen, his eyes widening in absolute shock as he looked from the phone to his wife. Before either of them could formulate a pathetic excuse, the heavy oak doors of the courtroom swung open. The bailiff announced that Magistrate Harrison was ready to resume. I locked my phone, slipped it back into my pocket, and walked past them without another word. Their panic was palpable, but this was just the beginning of their downfall. To understand how we reached this level of absolute hostility, you have to look back exactly 3 weeks to the reading of my father's will. We were all gathered in the freezing mahogany conference room of his longtime attorney, Mr. Sterling. Vivian was putting on the performance of a lifetime. She had spent the entire morning loudly discussing her grand plans to completely renovate the family estate and upgrade her luxury sedan to the newest model. Chloe sat next to Marcus. They treated the solemn reading of a last will and testament like a joke. I sat quietly at the opposite end of the long table, just waiting for the inevitable explosion. Mr. Sterling cleared his throat, adjusted his reading glasses, and opened the thick leather binder. He skipped the usual pleasantries and went straight to my father's final financial wishes. To my wife Vivian, I leave a monthly stipend of $4,000 to be managed and dispersed at the sole discretion of the estate executor. Vivian immediately stopped dabbing her eyes. Her hand froze in mid-air. She blinked rapidly as if the lawyer had suddenly started speaking another language. A stipend, she repeated, her voice losing its widow tone and sharpening into a shrill shriek. What do you mean, a stipend? I am his legally wedded wife. The entire estate belongs to me. Mr. Sterling did not look up from the document. He continued reading in a dry, monotonous voice that only angered her further. The entirety of my liquid assets, business holdings, and real estate properties, including the primary family residence, are hereby transferred into the Washington Family Irrevocable Trust. The sole trustee and executor of this estate, with full unilateral authority over all financial decisions, asset liquidations, and property management, shall be my daughter, Kendra Washington. The room plunged into a suffocating silence. You could have heard a pin drop on the thick carpet. Then the chaos erupted exactly as I had predicted. Vivian slammed both of her hands onto the mahogany table, her heavy wooden chair screeching against the hardwood floor as she stood up violently. That is a complete lie, she screamed, her face turning an ugly shade of purple. He would never do that to me. He promised me the house. He promised me the investment accounts. You forged this document. You manipulated him when he was sick and vulnerable on his deathbed. I remained perfectly still, simply watching her unravel before my eyes. I did not manipulate anyone, Vivian, I replied calmly, leaning back in my chair. Dad knew exactly what he was doing when he signed those papers. He knew you had a severe gambling problem, and he knew Marcus was drowning in secret debt. He wanted to protect the legacy he spent his entire life building from being completely squandered in 6 months. Chloe jumped to her feet, her expensive tablet clattering loudly onto the table. This is completely unacceptable, she declared, her white savior complex shifting into high gear. You are just his daughter from a previous marriage. You have no right to hoard wealth that rightfully belongs to Marcus and Vivian. This is exactly the kind of selfish, arrogant behavior we have all been tolerating from you for years. Marcus, say something to her right now. Marcus just stared blankly at the table, rubbing his temples in defeat. Vivian leaned aggressively across the table, pointing a shaking finger directly at my face. You listen to me, you arrogant little brat, she hissed, her church lady mask completely gone. You are not taking my money. I will hire the best lawyers in Chicago. I will drag your name through the mud. I will tell everyone in this city how mentally unstable you are. I will contest this will and have it thrown out of court if it is the last thing I do. I looked at her angry, twisted face and simply nodded. Do what you feel is necessary, Vivian, I told her softly. But she had no idea that her threat was exactly what I had been waiting for. When my father and I restructured his assets, we anticipated her greed. She was completely unaware of the ironclad no contest clause buried deep on page 42 of the document. By threatening to challenge the will in court, Vivian was stepping right into a legal bear trap that would permanently strip her of every single penny she was just promised. That bear trap, however, would take time to fully snap shut. In the immediate aftermath of the will reading, Vivian realized she needed to control the narrative. If she was going to convince a judge that I was mentally incompetent, she needed witnesses. She needed the community to believe her lies. And in our neighborhood, there was no better place to plant a poisonous seed than the First Corinthian Baptist Church on a Sunday morning. My father had been a deacon there for 20 years. His pew in the second row was practically a historical landmark. I decided to attend service that Sunday just to see how fast Vivian would launch her smear campaign. I walked through the heavy wooden doors wearing a simple black dress and immediately felt the shift in the atmosphere. The usual warm greetings from the usher board were replaced by awkward glances and hushed whispers. Women in oversized hats leaned into each other as I walked down the center aisle. Vivian had already done her groundwork. She was sitting in my father's usual spot, surrounded by Marcus and Chloe, who was wearing a ridiculously conservative floral dress to blend in. I took a seat 3 rows behind them. The service proceeded normally until Pastor Miller reached the community announcements portion of the morning. Pastor Miller was a charismatic man who loved the sound of his own voice, but he was also deeply dependent on the generous tithes my father used to provide. Vivian knew exactly how to use that financial leverage. The pastor gripped the edges of the wooden pulpit and lowered his voice into a tone of deep pastoral concern. "Church family," he began, looking out over the congregation. "Today we need to lift up a special prayer for the Washington family. As we all know, we recently lost our beloved brother Washington. But the tragedy did not end there. Sister Vivian has come to me with a heavy heart seeking our spiritual support." He paused dramatically, wiping his brow. "The devil is busy attacking the minds of our young people. We need to pray for Brother Washington's daughter Kendra. Grief is a heavy burden, and unfortunately, it has taken a severe toll on her mental health. She is struggling with her grip on reality and making reckless decisions that are tearing this beautiful family apart. Let us pray that she accepts the professional help her loving stepmother and sister-in-law are desperately trying to provide." The sanctuary erupted into a chorus of sympathetic murmurs. "Amen" and "Lord help her" echoed around the room. I watched as Vivian lowered her head, pretending to wipe away tears. Chloe reached over and rubbed Vivian's shoulder, looking around to make sure everyone saw her performance as the supportive white ally. Marcus just stared at the floor, looking miserable. They were publicly humiliating me, trying to build a documented history of my supposed insanity. They figured if the entire church believed I was crazy, the probate judge would believe it too. The offering plates were being passed around the sanctuary by the ushers. The organist began playing a soft hymn. I did not run out of the sanctuary in tears. I did not stand up and scream that they were lying. That is exactly what a mentally unstable person would do. Instead, I calmly stood up from my pew, smoothed down my dress, and walked confidently straight down the center aisle toward the altar. Every eye in the building followed me. The whispers grew louder, but I kept my posture perfectly straight. I reached the front just as an usher was handing the brass offering plate to Pastor Miller. I pulled a crisp $100 bill from my purse. The pastor looked at me with a mixture of pity and nervousness, clearly expecting me to cause a scene. I placed the $100 bill gently into the gold plate. "Pastor Miller," I said, my voice carrying clearly without me having to shout. "The acoustics in First Corinthian were excellent. I appreciate your prayers for my mental health. But since we are laying all of our family burdens on the altar today, I think we need to adjust your prayer list." The church fell completely silent. The organist actually stopped playing. I turned slightly so Vivian could see my face. "Do not waste your prayers on my sanity, Pastor," I continued, maintaining a polite and even tone. "You should probably ask the Lord to protect Vivian's offshore bank accounts in the Cayman Islands, because the Internal Revenue Service is going to need a lot more than a simple Sunday prayer when they finally find out she has been intentionally hiding illegal, undeclared assets from the federal government for the last 5 consecutive years without ever telling anyone." I walked out of that sanctuary, leaving the entire congregation in absolute shock. Like cornered rats, my family immediately scrambled to find another way to take me down. 2 days later, a loud knock echoed through my downtown apartment. I checked the security camera feed. It was Marcus and Chloe standing in my hallway. Standing right behind them was a tall woman I had never seen before, wearing a beige linen suit and carrying a clipboard. I opened the door, keeping the chain locked. "What do you want, Marcus?" I asked. He looked down at his shoes, leaving Chloe to do the talking. "Kendra, we need to come inside," Chloe said, using her softest, most condescending therapist voice. "We are here because we love you, and we are extremely worried about your rapid cognitive decline. We brought someone very special to meet you. Open the door, Kendra, or we will be forced to involve the authorities." I unlatched the chain and let them step inside my apartment. I wanted to see exactly how far they were willing to take this charade. The strange woman walked in and immediately started looking around my clean, organized living room as if she was inspecting a crime scene. "Hello, Kendra," the woman said, offering a fake compassionate smile. "My name is Dr. Evelyn Hayes. I am a holistic wellness coach and behavioral interventionist. Your brother and sister-in-law hired me because they are deeply concerned about the paranoid delusions you have been experiencing lately." I crossed my arms and stared at Chloe. "An intervention?" I asked, my voice completely flat. "You brought a fake wellness coach to my home for an intervention." Chloe let out a dramatic sigh and placed her designer bag on my kitchen counter. "She is not fake, Kendra. She is here to help you process the intense hallucinations you had at church on Sunday. You stood up in front of the entire congregation and started screaming about offshore bank accounts and the IRS. You completely humiliated your mother. Vivian is devastated. You are imagining these massive financial conspiracies because your mind is desperately trying to cope with the trauma of losing your father." Marcus finally looked up and nodded eagerly. "Yes, Kendra," he added quickly. "You are seeing things that are not there. You keep talking about missing assets and hidden money, but the estate lawyer already showed us the initial paperwork. Everything is perfectly fine. You need to check yourself into a facility and let Dr. Hayes help you before you completely lose your grip on reality." I walked over to my kitchen island and poured myself a glass of water. They were actively trying to gaslight me in my own home. They wanted me to doubt my own professional expertise. They thought if they repeated the lie enough times, I would magically forget how to do my job. Chloe stepped closer to me, her eyes wide with manufactured pity. "Kendra, you are exhausted," she whispered, reaching out to touch my arm. I stepped back before she could make contact. "Just sign the temporary power of attorney over to Marcus," she continued. "Let us manage the trust while you focus on healing. You keep saying money is missing from the estate, but it is all in your head. There is no missing money. Your brain is just playing cruel tricks on you." Dr. Hayes pulled a pen from her clipboard and held out a stack of medical release forms. "We have a wonderful private holistic retreat in upstate New York," she said smoothly. "You can rest there for a few months. Your family will take care of the financial burden. All you have to do is sign these documents right now." I looked at the three of them standing in my living room trying to trap me in their little web of lies. I took a slow sip of my water and set the glass down on the granite counter. "I am not hallucinating, Chloe," I said clearly and firmly, "and I am definitely not imagining things. In fact, my vision has never been clearer." I walked over to my dining table and picked up a thick blue folder, holding it up for them to see. I did not just review the primary trust documents, I explained, watching their confident expressions begin to falter. "I spent the last 48 hours doing a complete forensic audit of the secondary estate accounts and the offshore holdings. You thought I was acting paranoid, but I already tracked every single penny. My brain is not playing tricks on me because math does not lie." I opened the folder and pulled out the top sheet of paper. "Exactly $150,000 is missing from my father's secondary investment portfolio. Exactly $150,000 is missing from my father's secondary investment portfolio." The color drained from Chloe's face. Marcus stepped back toward the door looking terrified. "Get out of my apartment," I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "Take your fake coach and leave before I call the authorities and have you arrested for extortion." They practically tripped over each other, rushing out into the hallway. I locked the deadbolt, thinking I had won the battle. I sat down at my dining table to continue reviewing the offshore accounts. I needed to find out exactly where that missing money went. But my toxic family was not done. They were just changing their tactics from psychological manipulation to physical danger. Less than 2 hours later, a loud, aggressive pounding rattled my front door. It was not a polite knock, it was the sound of heavy fists hitting the wood. Chicago Police Department opened the door immediately, a deep voice shouted from the hallway. My blood ran cold. As a black woman living alone in America, having the police called to your home for a wellness check is not a minor inconvenience. It is a potentially life-threatening situation. I knew exactly what Chloe had done. She realized she could not gaslight me, so she weaponized the police against me. I walked to the door and took a slow, deep breath to steady my racing heart. I opened the deadbolt and slowly pulled the door wide open, making sure both of my empty hands were clearly visible. Two large police officers stood in the hallway, their hands resting cautiously near their holstered weapons. "Are you Kendra Washington?" the taller officer asked, his eyes scanning my face and then darting past me to assess my living room. "Yes, officer, I am Kendra," I replied, keeping my voice completely calm and even. "How can I help you today? We received a frantic emergency call from your sister-in-law." The officer explained, his posture still stiff and alert. "She stated that you were suffering from a severe psychotic break. She told the dispatcher that you were violently tearing your apartment apart, throwing furniture, and most importantly, she claimed you were armed with a handgun and threatening to harm yourself and others." I felt a surge of pure rage, but I kept my face entirely neutral. Chloe had deliberately lied about a firearm to ensure the police would arrive on edge. She was hoping I would panic, yell, or act aggressively out of fear. She wanted me to look crazy, or worse, she did not care if I got hurt. "Officer, please come inside," I said, stepping back and gesturing to my immaculate living room. "As you can see, my apartment is completely intact. There is no thrown furniture and no broken glass. Furthermore, I have never owned a firearm in my entire life. You are welcome to search the premises if you need to verify that." The two officers stepped inside. They looked at the perfectly vacuumed rug, the neat stacks of financial documents on the dining table, and the quiet, peaceful atmosphere of my home. The tension in the room immediately evaporated. The taller officer took his hand off his duty belt and sighed heavily. "I am a senior forensic accountant for a major downtown financial firm," I explained calmly, walking over to the table and picking up my corporate badge. I handed it to the officer along with my business card. "My father passed away recently and left me in charge of his estate. My sister-in-law and my stepbrother are currently attempting to have me declared legally incompetent so they can drain the family trust fund. They just left my apartment 2 hours ago after I confronted them with proof of their embezzlement. They made this call to create a fake police record of mental instability." The officers exchanged a long, knowing look. They had seen these kinds of bitter family disputes over money before. The lead officer handed my corporate badge back to me and pulled a small notepad from his chest pocket. "Ms. Washington, I apologize for the intrusion," he said, his tone shifting from authoritative to sympathetic. "It is abundantly clear that you are in no distress and are certainly not a danger to anyone." He scribbled something on a card and tore it off. He handed it to me. "This is the incident report number." He continued, his eyes hardening with professional disgust. "Making a false emergency call and lying about a firearm is a serious misdemeanor. Your sister-in-law just created a documented police record, but it is not the one she wanted. You can use this report to file criminal harassment charges against her whenever you are ready." The two officers left, quietly closing the door behind them. I stood in the silence of my living room, holding the small card with the incident report number. Chloe had just handed me a loaded weapon in our legal battle, but I was not ready to fire it just yet. I needed the rest of the ammunition. I walked over to my dining table and packed my laptop into my leather bag. I could not stay in this apartment anymore. If they were willing to call the police to stage a psychotic break, they could easily try something worse. I needed a secure network, and I needed someone who could dig deeper than my corporate clearances allowed. I grabbed my car keys and drove straight to the industrial district on the west side of Chicago. I parked outside a converted warehouse that looked completely abandoned. I walked up 3 flights of concrete stairs and knocked twice on a heavy steel door. The door clicked open, revealing a massive loft filled with server racks and empty energy drink cans. Sitting behind a desk with 4 glowing monitors was my oldest friend from college, Derek. He was a former cybersecurity analyst who got fired from a major tech firm for hacking into his own boss's emails to expose corporate fraud. Now he worked as an independent private investigator and digital forensics expert. He was brilliant and completely off the grid. "You look like you just survived a hostage situation," Derek said, spinning around in his ergonomic chair and tossing me a bottle of water. I caught the bottle and pulled up a chair next to his workstation. "It was close," I replied, taking a sip. "My family just tried to swat me. My white sister-in-law told the Chicago police I was having a violent psychotic break and was armed with a handgun." Derek stopped smiling immediately. His hands hovered over his keyboard. "Are you serious, Kendra?" he asked, his voice tight with anger. "That is attempted murder. They wanted the cops to walk in shooting." "I know," I said, keeping my emotions locked down. "The police saw right through it, but it proves my family is getting desperate. They know I am auditing my late father's estate, and they are terrified of what I am going to find. I need your help, Derek." I found a hole in the secondary investment portfolio. Exactly $150,000 was liquidated and wired out 2 days before my father died. I tracked the wire to an offshore holding company, but the trail goes cold after that. "I need you to break through the corporate veil. Hand me the routing numbers," Derek said, his fingers already flying across his mechanical keyboard with a loud clacking sound. I opened my laptop and read the transaction IDs and Swift codes. We fell into an easy rhythm, working side by side like we used to during our late-night study sessions in college. I handled the financial logic, and he handled the digital locks. For the next 3 hours, we chased the ghost money. They were clever, I have to admit. The funds were not simply transferred. They were bounced through a series of complex microtransactions designed to avoid triggering standard banking alerts. The money went from the estate account to a dummy corporation in Delaware, then fragmented into 5 smaller wires sent to a holding company in the Bahamas. "Whoever set this up knew what they were doing," I murmured, watching lines of code scroll rapidly across Derek's third monitor. "Or they paid someone a lot of money to do it for them," Derek countered, his eyes darting back and forth. "But they made one stupid mistake. They got lazy on the final transfer. They aggregated the funds back into a single lump sum before sending it to the final destination account. I got a ping on the routing number. It landed in a domestic corporate account based right here in Illinois." "Who owns the account?" I asked, leaning closer to the screen. Derek rapidly typed a series of commands, pinging the Illinois Secretary of State Business Registration database. "Let us find out," he muttered. He pulled the articles of incorporation for the final shell company. It was listed as a high-end vintage furniture curation service. The screen flashed and a scanned PDF document appeared displaying the original registration signatures. Derek enlarged the image and pointed to the bottom of the screen. "Look at the managing director," he said softly. I stared at the name printed clearly on the screen. It was not Vivian. My stepmother had nothing to do with this specific theft. The shell company was registered under the maiden name of my wonderful, supportive sister-in-law, Chloe. The shell company was registered under Chloe's maiden name. The sheer audacity of her actions made me laugh out loud in the dark warehouse. Derek quickly pulled up her recent public social media profiles. Chloe was not just hiding the stolen money, she was actively spending it. Right now, she was hosting an exclusive charity gala at the Oak Brook Country Club. The event was supposedly designed to raise awareness for mental health initiatives. This was a sickeningly ironic twist, considering she had just sent the police to my house for a fake psychiatric emergency. I grabbed my laptop bag and drove back to my downtown apartment. I had 30 minutes to change my clothes and prepare my next move. I bypassed the business suits and pulled out an emerald green silk gown. If I was going to crash a high society country club event, I was going to do it looking completely unbothered. I drove to the sprawling estate, handed my keys to the valet, and walked right past the front desk. I knew exactly how to navigate these elite spaces. You just walk with enough authority and cold confidence that nobody dares question your presence. The grand ballroom was dripping with crystal chandeliers and massive floral arrangements. Waitstaff in crisp white tuxedos carried silver trays of expensive appetizers through the crowd. I spotted Chloe almost immediately. She wore a custom white designer dress, holding a crystal flute of champagne, and holding court with wealthy older white women. They stood near the main bar, laughing loudly and patting each other on the back for being charitable saviors. I walked directly toward the bar, positioning myself right next to her affluent circle. The bartender approached and asked what I wanted to drink. I ordered a neat bourbon, speaking just loudly enough to cut through their polite aristocratic chatter. I took a slow sip and turned slightly toward the woman closest to Chloe. She wore a massive diamond necklace that caught the light from the chandeliers above. I smiled at the woman and complimented her jewelry. She thanked me graciously and asked if I was a friend of the lovely hostess. I looked right at Chloe, who had finally noticed me standing there. The blood instantly drained from her perfectly contoured face, leaving her pale and terrified. "I am her sister-in-law," I replied, my voice carrying easily over the soft jazz music. "I actually handle the complex finances for our family estate." It is fascinating work, really. I just discovered a brilliant new trend in philanthropic fraud occurring right here in Chicago. The older women leaned in, suddenly, very deeply interested. "Oh, really?" one of them asked, raising her perfectly drawn eyebrows. "Yes," I continued, taking another smooth sip of my bourbon. "People are setting up fake shell companies registered under their maiden names to embezzle hundreds of thousands of dollars from grieving families. Then they use that stolen money to fund lavish charity galas exactly like this one to artificially boost their own social status. It is a textbook money laundering scheme disguised as community service. I am working with an investigator right now, tracking a desperate woman who stole exactly $150,000 to do this. The penalty for federal wire fraud and Medicare manipulation is usually about 10 full years in federal prison." The group of wealthy women fell completely dead silent. They looked at me in complete shock, and then looked nervously over at Chloe. Chloe's hand was shaking so badly she nearly dropped her expensive champagne glass. "Excuse us for a brief moment," Chloe stammered, grabbing her silver evening purse. Her manicured fingers dug painfully into my bare upper arm. Her grip was surprisingly strong and highly aggressive. She physically dragged me away from the bar and pulled me forcefully behind a large decorative marble pillar located near the coat check room. Her eyes were wild, desperate, and furious. "Listen to me, you arrogant little psycho," she hissed, her voice dripping with pure venom. "You are going to leave this club right now. If you ever show your face and embarrass me in front of my friends again, I will have you locked in a psychiatric ward so fast your head will spin. I have the medical connections to do it, and I will completely ruin your entire life." She squeezed my arm even harder, deliberately trying to hurt me and letting her true, violent nature finally show. I did not flinch or try to pull away from her extremely painful grasp. I just looked down at a small, elegant silver brooch pinned securely to the neckline of my green dress. She had absolutely no idea she had just confessed and violently threatened me directly into a high-definition hidden microphone. I looked down at her white-knuckled grip on my arm and offered a cold, dismissive smile. "I suggest you let go of me, Chloe," I said, my tone dropping to a dangerous whisper, "before you ruin your own party and give your wealthy friends something real to gossip about." She sneered but quickly released my arm, taking a step back as if I had burned her. She spun around and marched back to her circle of friends, her perfect posture completely ruined by her panic. I calmly walked out of the country club, handed my ticket to the valet, and drove away into the night. The moment I was safely inside my car, I pulled the silver brooch from my dress and plugged it into my laptop. The audio playback was crystal clear. I had her confession securely saved in 3 different cloud drives before I even reached my apartment. But I knew my toxic family well enough to understand that a cornered animal is the most dangerous kind. Chloe would immediately call Marcus and Vivian. They would realize that their sloppy financial game was falling apart, and that I was actively digging into their crimes. They needed a new strategy. If they could not outsmart me with numbers, they would try to completely invalidate my existence. 2 days later, my private investigator friend Derek called me with an urgent update. He had been monitoring their digital footprint and flagged a series of unusual transactions originating from Vivian's personal checking account. She had just written a massive retainer check to a man named Dr. Richard Carter. I asked Derek to pull everything he could find on this doctor. The profile he sent me was deeply disturbing. Dr. Carter was not a respected medical professional. He operated a shady private clinic on the outskirts of the city, catering exclusively to wealthy families who needed quiet medical favors. He was known for providing whatever diagnosis his clients paid for, no questions asked. Vivian and Marcus had pivoted their entire plan. They knew they could not defeat a forensic accountant in a battle over bank statements, so they decided to erase my credibility entirely. Vivian was paying this corrupt psychiatrist to retroactively diagnose me with severe bipolar disorder. According to the preliminary notes Derek managed to intercept from the clinic's unsecured server, Vivian had spent 3 hours sitting in Dr. Carter's office, spinning a web of absolute lies. She claimed I had a long, undocumented history of manic episodes. She told him I was prone to violent outbursts, financial recklessness, and severe paranoia. She blamed my father's recent passing as the trigger for a complete psychotic break. She even submitted the fake police incident report Chloe had maliciously created as hard evidence of my supposed dangerous behavior. Dr. Carter never spoke to me. He never evaluated me. He never even looked at my actual medical history. But for a $50,000 retainer, he was more than happy to sign his name to a sworn medical affidavit declaring me legally incompetent and a direct danger to my own financial well-being. They were building a fraudulent medical fortress around their embezzlement scheme to protect themselves from prison. I was sitting at my kitchen island reviewing Derek's latest findings when a sharp knock echoed from my front door. I checked the camera expecting another fake wellness check. Instead, I saw a man in a plain gray suit holding a thick manila envelope. He did not look like police. He looked like a courier. I opened the door cautiously. "Kendra Washington?" he asked, looking down at a clipboard. "Yes," I replied. He shoved the heavy envelope into my hands. "You have been served," he said, turning around and walking quickly down the hallway. I locked the door and carried the envelope to the kitchen counter. My hands were perfectly steady as I tore open the seal and pulled out the thick stack of legal documents. The bold black letters at the top of the first page made my blood run instantly cold. It was a formal petition filed in the probate court of Chicago. The petitioners were listed as Vivian Washington and Marcus Washington. They were formally requesting the court to strip me of my rights, my assets, and my personal autonomy. Attached to the petition was Dr. Carter's fraudulent psychiatric evaluation. They were not just trying to steal my father's money anymore. They were trying to take away my freedom completely. They were actually trying to Britney Spears me. I stared at the legal threat lying on my granite counter and realized this was no longer just a simple family dispute over a trust fund. This was a declaration of absolute war, and I was ready to fight back with everything I had. 2 weeks later, I found myself sitting in a freezing conference room high above the Chicago skyline. It was the official pretrial deposition. A court reporter sat in the corner, silently typing every single word on her stenograph machine. Across the long, polished mahogany table sat Vivian and her heavily overpaid attorney, Mr. Caldwell. Marcus and Chloe were conveniently absent, likely hiding from the legal crossfire they had helped create. Mr. Caldwell was a classic corporate bulldog. He wore a custom-tailored suit and had a habit of adjusting his expensive silk tie every time he was about to deliver what he thought was a lethal legal blow. My own attorney David sat quietly beside me taking meticulous notes. I had specifically instructed David to let Mr. Caldwell do all the talking. I wanted Vivian and her lawyer to feel completely confident. I wanted them to overplay their hand so badly that they could never walk it back. Mr. Caldwell leaned forward, resting his elbows aggressively on the table. He looked at me with a mixture of manufactured pity and genuine contempt. "Miss Washington," he began, his voice dripping with practiced condescension. "We are here today to establish the facts regarding your recent mental health struggles and your inability to properly manage the Washington Family Trust. My client, your loving stepmother, is simply trying to protect you from your own destructive behavior." I stared at him without blinking. I did not offer a polite smile or a defensive angry outburst. I just waited for him to present his fabricated evidence. Mr. Caldwell smirked, taking my total silence as a sign of medicated weakness. "Let us review your recent financial history, Miss Washington," he continued, flipping open a thick leather binder. "Over the past month, you have displayed highly erratic spending patterns. You locked your family out of their ancestral home, causing severe emotional distress to a grieving widow. But more importantly, you have been hemorrhaging cash at an alarming rate." He pulled out a heavy stack of bank statements and slid them aggressively across the polished table toward me. "As a forensic accountant, you must appreciate the clear story that numbers tell," he said, his tone turning sharp and accusatory. "These records show massive withdrawals and bizarre transfers that clearly indicate a woman experiencing a severe manic episode." I glanced down at the papers without touching them. They were official copies of the trust accounts mixed with fabricated summaries. Mr. Caldwell was building momentum, raising his voice for the benefit of the court reporter. "Your behavior has become so unpredictable and dangerous that you even attempted to secretly check yourself into a psychiatric facility," he declared loudly, pointing an accusing finger at me. Vivian let out a soft, calculated sob, dabbing her perfectly dry eyes with a lace tissue. I finally spoke, keeping my voice entirely flat and devoid of emotion. "I have never checked myself into a psychiatric facility, Mr. Caldwell." He smiled, a predatory grin showing all his teeth. "Then how do you explain this, Miss Washington?" He dramatically pulled a single sheet of paper from his binder and placed it directly in front of me, sliding it over the other documents. It was a wire transfer confirmation receipt from our primary banking institution. I looked at the document. It was a formal authorization moving exactly $200,000 from the primary estate trust account directly to the Serenity Pines Behavioral Wellness Center. The date on the wire transfer was just 4 days ago. "This is a massive sum of money," he pressed, leaning closer to me across the table. $200,000 sent to an exclusive luxury psychiatric facility. You are clearly aware of your rapidly declining mental state, and you are desperately trying to buy your way into private, discreet treatment, using funds that rightfully belong to the entire family. You are a danger to the estate and a profound danger to yourself. Just admit that you authorized this massive transfer, and we can end this painful process today." David shifted slightly in his chair, ready to object to the badgering, but I placed a gentle hand on his arm to stop him. I calmly picked up the wire transfer document and examined it closely. I looked at the routing numbers, the originating account details, and finally my eyes landed on the signature line at the very bottom of the page. The authorization required the signature of the primary trustee to clear the bank. My name was signed on that line in bold black ink. But as I stared at the specific loops and angles of the cursive letters, a genuine feeling of amusement bubbled up inside my chest. I tried to suppress it, but I simply could not. I let out a sharp, unexpected laugh. The bright sound echoed loudly in the quiet, tense conference room. Vivian dropped her lace tissue and glared at me with absolute hatred. Mr. Caldwell looked deeply offended, stepping back from the table. "You find this amusing, Miss Washington?" He snapped, his face turning a dark shade of red. "You are bleeding your family's legacy dry to treat your psychological breakdown, and you think it is funny." I placed the document back on the table and tapped my index finger directly on the signature line. "I find it hilarious, Mr. Caldwell," I replied, leaning forward to meet his angry gaze. "Because I did not authorize this $200,000 transfer. I did not sign this federal document. If you look very closely at the downward stroke on the letter K and the heavy pressure on the W, you will notice a distinct leftward slant. I do not write like that, but I know exactly who does. I looked directly at my stepmother, whose face had suddenly turned the color of wet ash. That is Vivian's forged handwriting, I stated clearly for the court reporter to record. My stepmother just submitted a forged wire fraud document into a federal deposition. The silence in the deposition room was deafening following my declaration. Mr. Caldwell frantically gathered his papers and abruptly ended the session, citing a sudden emergency. He knew his client had just committed a federal crime right in front of him. That was 5 days ago. Now it was the morning of the official probate trial, the morning my family intended to stand before Magistrate Harrison and formally request my placement into a psychiatric facility. I sat alone in a quiet coffee shop across the street from the downtown courthouse, sipping a black coffee and reviewing my meticulously organized forensic files. The bell above the coffee shop door chimed. I did not need to look up to know who had just walked in. The nervous, frantic energy radiating across the room was unmistakable. Marcus pulled out the metal chair across from me and sat down heavily. He looked absolutely terrible. The custom suit he wore was wrinkled and dark circles framed his bloodshot eyes. He was sweating profusely despite the cool morning air conditioning. He looked nervously around the empty cafe before leaning across the small wooden table. "Kendra, we need to talk," he whispered, his voice trembling with poorly concealed panic. I took a slow sip of my coffee and set the cup down carefully. "I am listening, Marcus," I replied, keeping my expression completely neutral. He swallowed hard, wiping sweat from his forehead. "This whole situation has gotten completely out of hand," he began, trying to sound reasonable. "Mom is extremely stressed. Chloe is having panic attacks. The family is falling apart, Kendra. We do not want to go into that courtroom today and destroy your reputation. We want to find a peaceful resolution." I raised a single eyebrow, waiting for the actual point of his sudden visit. Marcus leaned closer, lowering his voice even further. "I convinced Mom to offer you a settlement deal," he said, rushing the words out. "If you agree to transfer exactly 50% of the total estate assets into her name, she will drop the entire conservatorship petition. She will withdraw the medical affidavit from Dr. Carter. We will walk away and let you keep the other half. We can pretend none of this ever happened and move on." I stared at my stepbrother, studying his desperate face. He was trying to frame this as a generous compromise. He wanted me to believe he was saving me from the humiliation of a public trial. But I am a forensic accountant. My entire career is based on seeing the truth hidden beneath the numbers and the lies. I looked at his shaking hands and his panicked eyes, and I instantly realized the truth. Marcus was not here to save me. He was here to save himself. The forged wire transfer document from the deposition had completely terrified him. He finally understood that Vivian and Chloe had not just played a dirty family trick. They had crossed the line into serious federal offenses. Wire fraud and forgery carried massive mandatory prison sentences. Marcus was suddenly realizing that he was an accessory to a major felony. "You are not offering me a deal, Marcus," I said, my voice low and steady. "You are begging for a life raft. You saw the forged signature on that $200,000 transfer, and you finally realized your mother is going to federal prison. Now you are terrified that you are going to be dragged down right alongside her." His eyes darted nervously toward the cafe window. "Kendra, please," he begged, his voice cracking. "If we go into that courtroom today, there is no turning back. Mom is determined to destroy you if you do not pay her. Just give her half the money and save yourself." I slowly closed my leather portfolio and slid it into my briefcase. I leaned forward, resting my arms on the table, and looked directly into his terrified eyes. "Let me explain exactly what is going to happen today, Marcus," I told him, my tone completely devoid of any sympathy. "I am not giving Vivian a single dime of my father's money. I am going to walk into that courthouse and I am going to mathematically dismantle every single lie your wife and your mother have told. They are both going to lose everything. But you have one final choice to make." I stood up, picking up my briefcase and looking down at him. "You have exactly 24 hours to contact the district attorney and officially turn state's evidence against your mother and your wife," I said coldly. If you testify against them, I will not name you in the civil fraud lawsuit. But if you walk into that courtroom today and support their lies, you will go down with them. I left Marcus sitting frozen in the coffee shop. 2 hours later, the heavy wooden doors of the probate courtroom swung open and we were on the record. Magistrate Harrison took his seat at the high bench. At the petitioner's table, Vivian sat with perfect posture, wearing a conservative navy suit. Her attorney, Mr. Caldwell, stood next to her, looking incredibly confident, despite the disaster of our previous deposition. He clearly believed medical authority would override any financial evidence I presented. Marcus sat behind them in the gallery, looking absolutely sick to his stomach. Next to him sat Chloe, wearing a pristine white blouse and a subtle smirk. She looked completely unaware of the legal avalanche hanging directly over her head. Mr. Caldwell cleared his throat. "Your Honor," he began, his voice booming across the room. "To establish the severe necessity of this conservatorship, we call our primary expert witness to the stand. We call Dr. Richard Carter to testify regarding the rapidly deteriorating mental state of the respondent, Kendra Washington." The bailiff opened the side door and Dr. Carter walked in. He looked the part of a distinguished medical professional. He wore a tailored charcoal suit and carried a thick leather portfolio. His silver hair was perfectly combed, and he offered the judge a respectful nod before taking his seat in the witness box. He placed his left hand on the Bible and swore to tell the truth. It was a chilling display of comfortable perjury. Mr. Caldwell approached the podium. "Dr. Carter, could you please share your professional medical assessment regarding Kendra Washington with this court?" Dr. Carter adjusted the microphone and looked at me with a manufactured expression of clinical pity. "Based on my extensive review of the behavioral reports, police records, and family testimonials, I have diagnosed Miss Washington with severe bipolar disorder accompanied by acute paranoid delusions." He spoke with such smooth authority that a lesser person might have doubted their own sanity. The sudden loss of her father served as a massive psychological trigger. He continued, "She is exhibiting classic signs of mania, including reckless financial behavior, aggressive hostility toward her primary support system, and deep paranoid ideation. She genuinely believes her family is conspiring to steal from her, which is a textbook defensive projection to justify her own erratic hoarding of estate assets. She lacks the cognitive capacity to manage a multi-million-dollar trust." I sat perfectly still, listening to a man I had never spoken a single word to clinically dissect my brain for a $50,000 bribe. I did not glare at him. I simply took notes on my legal pad. From the gallery I could see Chloe shift in her seat. She offered a subtle, triumphant smirk directly at me. She truly believed they had won. She thought the word of a doctor would instantly erase my forensic expertise and silence me forever. She thought the system was designed to protect people exactly like her. Magistrate Harrison looked over his spectacles at the witness. "Doctor, you are stating for the record that you believe the respondent requires immediate institutional care and financial guardianship," he asked. "Yes, Your Honor," Dr. Carter replied firmly without missing a beat. "It is my professional medical opinion that leaving Miss Washington in control of her estate would result in catastrophic financial and personal harm." Mr. Caldwell smiled broadly and turned toward our table. "No further questions for this witness, Your Honor." He walked back to his seat, looking like a man who had just won the lottery. Magistrate Harrison turned his attention to my side of the room. "Does the defense wish to cross-examine this medical expert?" he asked. My attorney David slowly stood up from his chair. He walked calmly to the center of the room and looked directly into Dr. Carter's eyes. "Yes, Your Honor. We have a few brief questions," David said, his voice polite but icy. "Dr. Carter, you have spoken at great length today about your professional medical opinion and your clinical expertise." The doctor nodded confidently, leaning back in his wooden chair. "That is correct, Counselor." David took one step closer to the witness box, holding a single piece of paper out in front of him. For the official court record, Dr. Carter, could you please state the exact identification number of your active medical license to practice psychiatry in the state of Illinois? The smooth, confident smile instantly vanished from Dr. Carter's face. He blinked rapidly, staring at the paper in David's hand. The courtroom fell completely silent. The distinguished medical expert opened his mouth to speak, but absolutely no words came out. He just sat there frozen under the bright fluorescent lights, unable to answer the simplest question a doctor could ever be asked. The silence stretched on thick and suffocating. Dr. Carter shifted his weight in the heavy wooden chair, his eyes darting frantically toward Mr. Caldwell for some kind of lifeline. I do not see the relevance of reciting my license number from memory. He finally stammered, his smooth, authoritative voice completely cracking. I have provided my professional clinic letterhead to the court. My credentials speak for themselves. David did not back down. He took another step toward the witness stand, holding the single piece of paper firmly in his hand. Your credentials absolutely do speak for themselves, Dr. Carter, David replied, his voice echoing loudly in the tense courtroom. Or rather, I should call you Mr. Carter since you no longer possess the legal right to use that medical title in the state of Illinois. Mr. Caldwell shot up from his chair, slamming his hands flat on the petitioner table. Objection, Your Honor, he shouted, his face turning a dark shade of crimson. This is outrageous badgering. My client hired a respected medical professional to conduct an independent evaluation. The defense is trying to assassinate his character to distract from the respondent's obvious mental decline. Magistrate Harrison raised his hand, silencing the angry lawyer instantly. Overruled, counselor. The judge barked, his eyes narrowing sharply at the man in the witness box. I am highly interested in what the defense has to say. Proceed, David. Thank you, Your Honor, David said, turning his back on Dr. Carter and approaching the bench. I would like to submit Defense Exhibit C into the official court record. This is a certified disciplinary document obtained directly from the Illinois State Medical Board. Magistrate Harrison took the paper, put his spectacles back on, and began reading. The courtroom was so quiet I could hear the hum of the air conditioning vents. For the benefit of the court, David continued, projecting his voice so everyone in the gallery could hear perfectly. That document details a permanent revocation of medical licensure enacted exactly 3 years ago. Richard Carter was stripped of his medical license following a massive federal investigation into an illegal pill mill operation. He was found guilty of writing fraudulent prescriptions for heavy narcotics and billing Medicare for phantom patients. He avoided federal prison by cooperating with authorities, but he was permanently banned from practicing medicine or conducting psychiatric evaluations anywhere in the United States. Vivian let out a dramatic gasp, clutching her chest as if she had just been shot. She turned toward Mr. Caldwell, her eyes wide with manufactured innocence, silently pleading that she had no idea who she had hired. Marcus buried his face in his hands, fully realizing the catastrophic gravity of the situation. Dr. Carter gripped the edges of the witness box, his knuckles turning completely white. That was an administrative misunderstanding, he protested weakly, sweat visibly pooling on his forehead. I am still a certified holistic wellness consultant. A wellness consultant is not a licensed psychiatrist. Magistrate Harrison interrupted, his voice dropping to a dangerous, icy register. You sat in my courtroom, placed your hand on a Bible, and swore under oath that you were a practicing medical expert. You just committed blatant perjury in a federal probate hearing. But David was not finished. He turned away from the judge and walked directly toward the gallery, stopping just a few feet away from where my sister-in-law was sitting. Your Honor, the defense has one more crucial detail regarding this so-called medical evaluation. David announced, his eyes locked dead onto Chloe. We found it highly suspicious that Vivian Washington managed to find a disgraced, unlicensed doctor willing to risk jail time to fabricate a bipolar diagnosis for a woman he never even met. So we dug a little deeper into Mr. Carter's personal background. Chloe suddenly sat up perfectly straight, her face draining of all color. She reached out and grabbed Marcus by the arm, her fingernails digging into his expensive suit jacket. It turns out that Richard Carter did not just magically appear in Vivian's life, David explained, turning back to face the judge. His mother and Chloe's mother are biological sisters. The man sitting in the witness box. The man paid $50,000 from my clients, stolen estate funds, to falsely declare her legally insane, is actually Chloe's first cousin. A gasp rippled through the courtroom gallery. Chloe tried to stand up, her mouth opening to scream a denial, but Marcus physically pulled her back down into her seat, terrified of causing a larger scene. Magistrate Harrison slowly lowered the disciplinary document onto his desk. He turned his head and locked his furious, unblinking gaze directly onto Mr. Caldwell. The corporate attorney stood frozen, his mouth slightly open, looking like he was about to completely faint. The corporate attorney stood frozen, his mouth slightly open, looking like he was about to completely faint. Magistrate Harrison leaned forward, resting his elbows heavily on the elevated bench. "Counselor," he said, his voice dangerously quiet, "you have exactly 10 seconds to explain why I should not have you arrested immediately for suborning perjury." Mr. Caldwell gripped the edges of his table, his knuckles turning white. "Your Honor, I swear I had no prior knowledge of this man's revoked license," he stammered, his voice devoid of its former arrogance. "My client provided the medical expert. I was assured he was fully credentialed. I withdraw him as a witness immediately." Dr. Carter realized the trap had fully closed. He suddenly stood up from the witness box, grabbing his leather portfolio. "If I am no longer needed, I will just take my leave," he muttered, turning toward the side exit. "Sit down, Mr. Carter," the magistrate barked with such sudden ferocity that the disgraced doctor dropped his portfolio, spilling papers over the floor. "You are not going anywhere until the federal marshals arrive to take you into custody for perjury." That was the breaking point. The moment the word custody echoed through the courtroom, the delicate white savior facade Chloe had maintained for years shattered. She had spent $150,000 of stolen money to fund her lavish lifestyle and $50,000 more to buy this fake diagnosis. Now her cousin was about to be arrested, and the money was gone. She abruptly shoved her chair back, the wooden legs scraping across the polished floor. "This is a complete setup!" Chloe screamed, pointing a shaking, manicured finger directly at me. "You rigged this, Kendra. You manipulated the medical records. You bought off the judge." Marcus scrambled out of his seat, desperately grabbing her arm. "Chloe, please sit down," he begged, his voice cracking in absolute panic. "You are making it much worse. Let go of me, you pathetic coward," she hissed violently, shoving her husband backward so hard he stumbled and fell against the pews. She stepped out into the center aisle, ignoring the heavy gavel Magistrate Harrison was slamming against his sounding block. "You think you are so smart?" Chloe yelled, her face twisted into an ugly mask of pure hatred. "You think because you wear a fancy suit and work in a corporate office that you deserve this massive wealth? You do not. People like you do not know what to do with real money. You hoard it. You ruin it. I am the only one who knows how to properly elevate this family name. I am the one who brought actual class to your ghetto dynamic. Without my guidance, you are all just worthless trash." The entire courtroom froze. The blatant racism and classist entitlement hanging in the air was so heavy it felt suffocating. Vivian sat at the petitioner's table, her face buried in her hands, completely destroyed by the monster she had brought into our family. I simply sat at the defense table, my posture straight and my expression completely neutral. I did not need to defend myself. Chloe was doing all the work for me, exposing her true nature to a federal judge. "You stole that money from us," Chloe continued, her voice echoing wildly off the high ceilings. "That trust fund belonged to Marcus. It belonged to me. We deserved it. You are just a bitter, lonely woman who wants to punish us because you will never fit into high society. I was trying to save this family from your psychotic hoarding. You belong in a cage." "Order in my courtroom!" Magistrate Harrison roared, his voice booming over her unhinged rant. "Madam, you will close your mouth and step back behind the gallery barrier immediately." Chloe whipped her head around to glare at the judge, lost in her own delusion of superiority. "You cannot tell me what to do," she snapped, her chest heaving. "I know my rights. I know powerful people in this city who can have you removed from the bench for treating me this way. I am the true victim here." Magistrate Harrison did not blink. He looked down at her with an expression of absolute disgust. "You are no victim, madam," he said, his voice icy and resolute. "You are a severely disturbed individual who just admitted to attempting to defraud a federal trust, and you have thoroughly disrupted a formal legal proceeding. I am holding you in direct criminal contempt of court." He looked past her to the armed officers standing near the heavy wooden doors. "Bailiffs, detain this woman immediately. Put her in handcuffs and remove her from my sight." Two large officers stepped forward, pulling metal cuffs from their belts. Chloe suddenly realized the reality. Two large officers stepped forward, pulling metal cuffs from their belts. Chloe suddenly realized the reality. This was not a country club disagreement she could escape. As the cold steel clicked around her wrists, she let out a piercing shriek that echoed off the high ceiling. Marcus stood completely paralyzed, watching his wife being dragged backward toward the heavy wooden doors. She kicked and screamed, threatening to sue Chicago, but her voice was quickly muffled as bailiffs forced her out into the hallway. The heavy doors slammed shut, leaving behind absolute silence. Magistrate Harrison adjusted his robes and looked down at the petitioner's table. Mr. Caldwell looked like he had aged 10 years in the last 5 minutes. "Counselor," the magistrate said, his voice dangerously calm, "I strongly suggest you reconsider your current legal strategy before someone else leaves this courtroom in handcuffs. Do you have any further witnesses, or are we concluding this disastrous petition today?" Caldwell swallowed hard. He looked at Vivian, who was staring blankly at the doors where her daughter-in-law had just been dragged through. Vivian suddenly gripped her lawyer's sleeve. "Let me speak," she whispered fiercely, her eyes wild with desperation. "Put me on the stand right now. I can fix this." Mr. Caldwell hesitated, but he knew his career was already hanging by a thread. "Your Honor," he announced, his voice shaky, "we call the petitioner Vivian Washington to the stand." Vivian stood up, smoothing down her navy blue skirt. She walked slowly to the witness box, keeping her head bowed to perfectly play the role of the traumatized, grieving widow. She placed her hand on the Bible and swore to tell the whole truth, knowing fully well she was about to do the exact opposite. She took her seat and immediately pulled a fresh lace tissue from her pocket, dabbing her dry eyes. Mr. Caldwell approached the podium, taking a deep breath to steady his nerves. "Mrs. Washington," he began softly, "this has obviously been a deeply distressing morning, but we must address the core issue of this conservatorship. Why do you firmly believe your stepdaughter is in immediate danger to herself and the family estate?" Vivian looked up, her face twisted into an expression of profound maternal sorrow. "Because I have seen her madness with my own 2 eyes," she cried, her voice shaking with practiced emotion. "Just last week I went to the family estate to retrieve some of my late husband's belongings. I heard a noise coming from the backyard. I walked out to the patio and I saw Kendra standing over the stone fire pit. She was completely unhinged, laughing hysterically to herself. She had bundles of $100 bills and important financial documents, throwing them straight into the roaring fire. She was burning her own inheritance. I tried to stop her, but she looked at me with these dead, crazy eyes and told me I was next. She is a danger to us all." Mr. Caldwell turned to the judge, nodding solemnly. "Thank you, Mrs. Washington. No further questions." Magistrate Harrison looked over at our table. David stood up, buttoning his suit jacket. He did not look angry. He looked entirely victorious. He walked to the center of the room, holding a small black remote control. "Mrs. Washington," David said, his voice polite and steady, "you are absolutely certain about this event. You are testifying under oath that on the afternoon of Tuesday the 14th, you witnessed my client burning cash and documents in the estate fire pit." "Yes, I am absolutely certain," Vivian replied, lifting her chin defiantly. I will never forget the terrifying look on her face. "She is entirely insane." David nodded slowly. That is fascinating, Mrs. Washington, because my client is a forensic accountant who relies heavily on verifiable data. When she assumed control of the estate, her very first action was upgrading the security system, including installing high-definition hidden cameras overlooking the entire property. Vivian suddenly froze, her confident posture completely collapsing. David pointed the remote at the large television monitor mounted on the courtroom wall and pressed a single button. The screen flickered to life, displaying crystal-clear color footage of the estate backyard. The timestamp in this corner perfectly matched the exact date and time Vivian had just sworn to. The courtroom watched in absolute silence as a figure walked into the frame and approached the stone fire pit. It was not me. I was nowhere near the property. The high-definition footage clearly showed Vivian Washington standing completely alone. She was not burning bundles of cash. She was frantically tearing pages out of my late father's personal leather-bound journals, throwing them into the flames to permanently destroy the handwritten drafts of his true final will. She was frantically tearing pages out of my late father's personal leather-bound journals, throwing them into the flames to permanently destroy the handwritten drafts of his true final will. The entire courtroom let out a collective gasp of pure shock. Vivian stared at the high-definition monitor as if a ghost had just walked into the room. The color completely drained from her face and she slumped back against the heavy wooden chair. Mr. Caldwell buried his face in his hands, recognizing that his lucrative career was officially over. Magistrate Harrison did not yell or bang his gavel. He simply paused the video on a clear frozen frame of Vivian holding the burning documents. "That is destruction of evidence and tampering with a federal trust," the magistrate stated, his voice as cold as absolute zero. "Mrs. Washington, you are walking on a razor-thin line between civil penalties and federal prison. Do you have anything to say for yourself?" Vivian opened her mouth, but no sound came out. She just shook her head. Her perfectly crafted widow persona shattered into a million unfixable pieces. David stepped forward, shutting off the large television monitor. "Your Honor, the defense has one final piece of evidence to present. To properly explain the massive financial discrepancies alleged by the petitioner, I call my client, Kendra Washington, to the stand." I stood up from the defense table, smoothing the fine fabric of my tailored suit. I walked calmly and confidently to the witness box. I did not look at Vivian or Marcus. I kept my eyes locked respectfully on the magistrate. I placed my right hand on the Bible, swore the oath, and sat down. I was not taking the stand as a helpless victim defending her own sanity. I was taking the stand as a certified expert witness in forensic accounting. Miss Washington. David began pacing slowly in front of the empty jury box. "The petitioners submitted a bank wire transfer earlier today. They claimed you authorized a payment of exactly $200,000 to a psychiatric facility for your own mental health treatment. Can you please explain to the court exactly where that money actually went?" I adjusted the microphone and slowly opened my leather portfolio. "Yes, I can," I replied, my voice projecting clearly across the silent room. When I assumed control of the estate, I immediately initiated a standard forensic audit. I noticed a massive discrepancy involving a $200,000 wire transfer. The document Mr. Caldwell presented earlier listed the destination as the Serenity Pines Behavioral Wellness Center. However, wire transfers leave a permanent digital footprint that cannot be erased by simply forging a signature on a piece of paper. I pulled a thick stack of verified financial routing reports from my portfolio and handed them to the bailiff to pass directly to the judge. "If you follow the routing numbers, you will see that the money did not go to Serenity Pines," I explained. "The funds were initially sent to a dummy corporation in Delaware called Horizon Holdings. From there, the money was split into 4 separate payments of $50,000 each to intentionally avoid triggering federal banking alerts. Those 4 payments were then wired directly to a private medical facility in Southern California." Magistrate Harrison put his reading glasses back on and reviewed the routing documents. He looked up, his brow heavily furrowed in deep concentration. Miss Washington, this destination account does not belong to a psychiatric ward in Chicago. It belongs to the Ocean View Recovery Center in Malibu, California. That is absolutely correct, Your Honor, I stated firmly. The Ocean View Recovery Center is not a psychiatric facility for treating bipolar disorder. It is an exclusive luxury rehabilitation center specializing exclusively in severe substance abuse and chemical dependency. The $200,000 was used to pay up front for a fully confidential 6-month residential treatment program. Vivian sat completely frozen at her table, staring blankly ahead. Marcus was staring at the floor, looking like he wanted the ground to open up and swallow him whole. David stepped closer to the witness box, resting his hand on the wooden rail. And Miss Washington, who exactly was the registered patient receiving this expensive luxury treatment in Malibu? I looked directly at Marcus, whose eyes were welling up with tears of absolute shame. I did not go to Malibu. I answered, my voice echoing with devastating clarity. I have never struggled with substance abuse. The registered patient who spent 6 months at the Ocean View Recovery Center was my sister-in-law, Chloe Washington. She used my late father's estate money to secretly fund her own extensive rehabilitation for a severe prescription pill addiction while forcing my stepmother to forge the authorization documents herself. The silence that followed my revelation was heavy enough to crush bone. I watched the devastation ripple across the petitioner's table. Magistrate Harrison stared at the routing documents, his jaw tightly clenched. He looked directly at Marcus. Marcus was completely falling apart. His expensive tailored suit now looked like a prison uniform. Sweat poured down his forehead, stinging his eyes and soaking his collar. He was hyperventilating as he realized the federal government now had a crystal-clear map of their criminal conspiracy. He knew Chloe was already in handcuffs. He knew Dr. Carter was about to be arrested, and he knew he was next. Mr. Caldwell was frantically packing his leather briefcase. He wanted nothing to do with this sinking ship. He whispered fiercely to Vivian, saying they needed to invoke their Fifth Amendment rights immediately. But it was too late for legal strategies. The psychological pressure cooker I had carefully built around them was finally detonating. Marcus suddenly pushed his chair back with such violent force that it tipped over and crashed loudly against the hardwood floor. The sudden noise echoed like a gunshot in the quiet room. Everyone in the courtroom jumped. The armed bailiffs instinctively reached for their utility belts. "I cannot do this anymore!" Marcus screamed, his voice cracking in absolute terror. He grabbed his own hair, pulling at the roots as he stumbled away from the table. "I will not go to federal prison for them," he yelled. "I will not do it." Mr. Caldwell lunged forward forcefully, grabbing Marcus by the arm. "Shut your mouth, you fool!" The lawyer hissed, his own panic finally breaking through his polished professional exterior. "Anything you say right now will be used against you in a prosecution." But Marcus violently shoved the lawyer away. He staggered blindly into the center aisle, pointing a trembling finger directly at his own mother. It was all their idea. He sobbed, tears of pure panic streaming down his flushed face. It was all her idea. Mom and Chloe planned everything from the very beginning. They knew the money was permanently locked in the trust, and Chloe owed massive, terrifying debts to her private street dealers. She threatened to completely leave me and take everything if I did not help them steal the cash. Magistrate Harrison slammed his wooden gavel down hard. "Mr. Washington, you are making a spontaneous, unsworn confession to a massive federal crime in an open courtroom," he warned, his deep voice echoing with absolute authority. "I strongly advise you to secure independent legal counsel before you speak another word today." "I do not care," Marcus wailed, dropping heavily to his knees on the polished floor right in the middle of the wide aisle. "I want full federal immunity. I will tell you everything you want to know. Just do not let them lock me in a cell." I was physically present in the room when they forged those banking documents. Mom sat there and practiced Kendra's signature for 3 straight hours at the dining room table. She kept complaining about messing up the leftward slant on the letters. When she finally got it perfectly right, Chloe took the forged paper directly to the bank manager she had been secretly bribing. The dedicated court reporter typed furiously efficiently, capturing every single damning word of his disastrous, spontaneous confession. I helped them do it. Marcus continued burying his wet, pathetic face in his shaking hands. I personally logged into the main estate accounting software and permanently disabled the security email alerts so Kendra would not get notified about the massive unauthorized withdrawal. I am the one who printed the fake psychiatric evaluation forms for Dr. Carter to sign. I did it all because they repeatedly told me Kendra would never figure it out. They said she was just a stupid numbers girl, and our side of the family deserved the money more than she ever did. Please do not send me to prison. I will testify against both of them without hesitation. The sheer pathetic nature of his absolute betrayal hung heavily in the freezing air. He was a grown man openly sobbing on the floor, instantly selling out his own mother. Vivian stood up from her chair, her face entirely devoid of color, but her eyes burning with terrifying rage. The mask of the grieving church widow was completely gone, replaced by the vicious, manipulative woman she truly was. She slowly walked around the heavy wooden table, approaching her son, who was still kneeling and sobbing. "Mom, please," Marcus whimpered, looking up at her with terrified, tear-filled eyes. Vivian did not say a single word. She simply pulled her arm back and delivered a brutal, ringing slap directly across his face, right in the middle of the courtroom. The sound of flesh striking flesh cracked through the heavy silence of the probate court. Marcus recoiled from the brutal slap, falling backward onto the polished floor and clutching his rapidly bruising cheek. The two armed bailiffs immediately surged forward, grabbing Vivian's arms and pulling her forcefully away from her sobbing son. "Stand down, Mrs. Washington, or you will be placed in holding alongside your daughter-in-law." One of the officers barked, gripping her shoulders tightly. But Vivian was completely beyond the point of rational thought. The pristine church lady facade she had meticulously maintained for decades had entirely burned to ash, leaving only a cornered, desperate predator. She violently ripped her arm away from the bailiff and spun around to face the bench. Her chest was heaving and her eyes were wide with a terrifying, manic energy. "Do not listen to him," she shrieked, pointing a trembling finger directly at Marcus and then pivoting her hand to aim straight at me. "He is lying to protect her. She orchestrated all of this to frame us." Vivian gripped the wooden railing of the petitioner's table, her knuckles completely white, as she launched into the most unhinged performance of her entire life. "She cannot even care for herself." My stepmother wept dramatically in the courtroom, clutching her chest and forcing heavy artificial sobs from her throat. "She faked all of those financial records, Your Honor. She is a forensic accountant. She knows how to hack into banking systems and manipulate routing numbers. She created those fake shell companies and she hired an actor to pretend to be me on that patio video." I remained perfectly still at the defense table, watching her self-destruct. I did not object. David did not object. We just let the silence of the room absorb her frantic, absurd lies. "She is severely mentally unstable," Vivian continued, her voice reaching a shrill, desperate pitch. "She wants to destroy this family because her father loved me more than he ever loved her. You have to lock her away. You have to grant me the conservatorship before she bankrupts the entire estate with her paranoid delusions. She is dangerous, and she needs to be institutionalized immediately." The courtroom was dead silent, save for the pathetic sounds of Marcus quietly sobbing on the floor behind her. Magistrate Harrison did not reach for his wooden gavel. He did not yell for order. He simply sat back in his high leather chair and stared at the woman standing before him. The look of profound disgust on his face was absolute. He slowly lowered his glasses, resting them carefully on the enormous stack of legal documents spread across his desk. He leaned forward, folding his hands together, and looked directly into Vivian's wild, desperate eyes. "Mrs. Washington," the magistrate began, his deep voice completely devoid of any sympathy or warmth. You are standing in a federal courtroom accusing a certified financial professional of orchestrating a massive digital banking conspiracy to frame her own family. You are claiming she fabricated wire transfers, hacked secure servers, and magically faked high-definition security footage. Yes! Vivian cried eagerly, nodding her head up and down. That is exactly what she did. She is a mastermind, but she is completely insane. The magistrate let out a slow, heavy sigh. Did you honestly believe we would not verify the records? He asked, his voice dropping to a terrifyingly calm whisper. Her attorney gasped softly from his seat, clearly realizing the lethal trap had fully closed. She completely froze. The fake tears instantly stopped flowing. Vivian stared up at the judge, her mouth slightly open but no sound coming out. When an estate of this magnitude is contested under allegations of severe financial mismanagement, the court does not simply take the word of a grieving widow or a disgraced doctor, the magistrate explained, pulling a thick, heavy binder from the very bottom of his document stack. We conduct our own independent verification. And unfortunately for you, Mrs. Washington, the respondent did not need to hack into any banking systems to prove her case. Magistrate Harrison dropped the massive binder onto the center of his desk with a loud, heavy thud. He opened the cover, revealing hundreds of pages bearing the official seal of the United States federal government. What you fail to understand about forensic accountants is their absolute dedication to proactive compliance. He continued, looking down at the frozen woman. Miss Washington did not just investigate your financial theft this week. 3 months ago, exactly 48 hours after your late husband passed away, she proactively contacted the Internal Revenue Service and formally requested a comprehensive federal audit of the entire Washington Family Trust. The detailed federal report entirely validates her findings and completely destroys your lies. Magistrate Harrison opened the heavy federal binder and began reading the highlighted sections aloud. The United States Internal Revenue Service confirms that all trust accounting handled by Kendra Washington is perfectly balanced and executed with absolute fiduciary precision. He read, his voice echoing with finality across the room. Furthermore, federal investigators have already flagged the $200,000 wire transfer to the Malibu Recovery Center as a highly suspicious transaction involving multiple dummy corporations. They were simply waiting for my official ruling today to proceed with their own criminal indictments. Vivian seemed to physically shrink in her chair. The manic energy that had fueled her dramatic performance evaporated completely, leaving behind a hollow, terrified shell of a woman. She looked frantically around the courtroom, searching for a sympathetic face, but there was absolutely no one left to manipulate. Even the armed bailiffs glared at her with visible contempt. Based on the overwhelming and irrefutable evidence presented before this court, Magistrate Harrison continued, closing the thick binder with a definitive snap. I am dismissing this petition for conservatorship with extreme prejudice. Miss Washington is clearly of sound mind and possesses an exceptional aptitude for managing her late father's estate. The fact that she was dragged into this courtroom and subjected to this humiliating ordeal is a gross abuse of the judicial system. He paused, adjusting his dark robes and glaring directly down at the petitioner's table. But we are far from finished here today. What has been uncovered in this room goes far beyond a frivolous civil dispute. It is a highly coordinated, malicious conspiracy to defraud an estate, commit perjury, forge financial documents, and weaponize medical authority for personal financial gain. The judge turned his attention to his court clerk. Let the official record reflect that I am immediately referring Vivian Washington, Marcus Washington, and Chloe Washington to the Cook County District Attorney for criminal prosecution. I am also forwarding the entire transcript of today's proceedings along with the forged wire transfer documents and the video evidence of evidence destruction directly to the Federal Bureau of Investigation. The charges will include, but are not limited to, federal wire fraud, forgery, perjury, and criminal conspiracy. Marcus let out a loud, pathetic wail from the floor where he was still sitting. He curled into a tight ball, weeping openly. Vivian was hyperventilating, her hands gripping her chest as if she were having an actual heart attack. Your Honor, please, she gasped, struggling to catch her breath. "I am a widow. I am a respected member of my church. You cannot send me to a federal prison. I will pay the money back. I will sell my jewelry. I will do whatever you want." "You cannot buy your way out of federal crimes, Mrs. Washington," the magistrate replied, his tone devoid of any mercy. "You attempted to lock your stepdaughter in a psychiatric ward to cover up your own massive theft. You destroyed your late husband's personal journals. You slapped your own son in the middle of a federal proceeding. You have demonstrated a shocking level of depravity and greed." Vivian turned desperately to the man sitting next to her. "Mr. Caldwell, do something," she begged, digging her manicured fingernails into his tailored suit sleeve. "You are my lawyer. Stop him from doing this. File an appeal. Tell him about my fragile health." Mr. Caldwell violently yanked his arm out of her grasp, standing up so quickly his heavy wooden chair scraped loudly against the floor. He refused to even look at her. He faced the bench, keeping his posture rigid and professional. "Your Honor," he said, his voice tight with barely contained panic. "In light of the evidence presented today and the spontaneous confessions made by my client's own family members, I find myself in an impossible ethical position. It is abundantly clear that I was provided with fraudulent documents and perjured medical testimony." The lawyer swallowed hard, wiping a bead of sweat from his forehead. "I cannot effectively represent a client who has actively utilized my legal services to commit fraud upon this court. Therefore, I am formally requesting immediate permission to withdraw as legal counsel for Vivian Washington, effective immediately." Magistrate Harrison looked at the terrified attorney and gave a curt nod. "Your request to withdraw is granted." "Counselor," the judge stated flatly, "you are officially dismissed from this case. I strongly suggest you retain your own legal representation to deal with the inevitable state bar investigation regarding your failure to properly vet your expert witnesses." Mr. Caldwell did not hesitate. He grabbed his leather briefcase and practically sprinted down the center aisle, pushing past the weeping Marcus and disappearing through the heavy wooden doors without ever looking back. Vivian sat completely alone at the large petitioner's table, defenseless. She watched her attorney abandon her, and the reality of her isolation finally began to sink in. She had no husband to manipulate and no lawyer to protect her. Magistrate Harrison looked down with no pity. "Before I adjourn this hearing, there is one final administrative matter regarding the Washington Family Trust," the magistrate announced, cutting through the thick silence. "Since the petitioners formally challenged the executor and attempted to subvert the established trust, we must address the structural integrity of the estate." David stood up and approached the bench. "Your Honor, the defense would like to formally invoke the penalty provisions embedded within the original trust documents," David stated clearly. The late Mr. Washington understood the toxic dynamics of his own household. He knew certain family members would attempt to contest his final wishes. He instructed my client to design a highly specific legal trapdoor into the foundation of the estate. Vivian turned to look at me, her eyes wide with terror. Marcus stopped his pathetic sobbing and looked up, his tear-streaked face frozen in confusion. "What trapdoor?" Vivian whispered, barely audible. I stood up and walked over beside David. I looked at my stepmother with the cold, calculating precision of a forensic accountant reading a balance sheet. Section 4. Paragraph 12 of the Washington Family Irrevocable Trust contains a standard but highly aggressive no-contest clause, I explained, projecting my voice so the court reporter could catch every single syllable. "The clause explicitly states that any beneficiary who initiates legal proceedings to challenge the validity of the trust contest, the authority of the named executor, or attempt to illegally alter the distribution of assets will immediately forfeit their entire inheritance." Magistrate Harrison opened the original trust binder that David had submitted earlier. He flipped directly to Section 4 and scanned the page. He nodded slowly, recognizing the ironclad legal language. "It is a perfectly drafted in terrorem clause," the judge confirmed, looking back down at Vivian. "The language is absolute." Vivian gripped the edge of her wooden table. But I was guaranteed a $4,000 monthly stipend, she stammered, her voice shaking uncontrollably. Marcus was supposed to get 15% of the secondary investment accounts. We are beneficiaries. You cannot just take that away. My husband promised me that money to live on. He promised you that money provided you respected his final wishes, I replied, my tone completely flat and unyielding. You chose to ignore those wishes. You chose to hire a disgraced doctor to declare me legally insane. You chose to forge federal wire transfer documents to fund your daughter-in-law's luxury rehabilitation for drug addiction. You chose to burn my father's personal journals in a fire pit to destroy his legacy. You initiated a fraudulent legal proceeding to steal everything, and by doing so, you successfully triggered the exact mechanism designed to stop you. Magistrate Harrison closed the heavy trust binder. The law is incredibly clear on this matter. Mrs. Washington, the magistrate, declared, his voice echoing with absolute finality. A no-contest clause is fully enforceable in the state of Illinois, especially when the contest is brought forth through malicious fraud and blatant perjury. By filing this ridiculous conservatorship petition and submitting forged evidence, you and your son have legally challenged the estate. Marcus let out a horrifying gasp from the floor. He crawled toward the petitioner's table, grabbing the leg of his mother's chair. "Mom, tell them to stop," he pleaded, his voice completely wrecked. "We need that 15%. Chloe has massive debts. I have nothing left. Tell them we withdraw the petition." "You cannot withdraw a crime once it has been committed in a federal courtroom," Magistrate Harrison told him sharply. "The trapdoor has already opened. As the presiding judge, I hereby rule that the no contest clause of the Washington Family Trust is fully activated, effective immediately. Vivian Washington and Marcus Washington have violated the terms of the trust through fraudulent litigation." The judge picked up his wooden gavel. "All prior financial allocations, stipends, allowances, and percentages promised to Vivian and Marcus Washington are permanently revoked," the judge announced. "The funds will be immediately absorbed back into the primary trust under the sole control of Kendra Washington. You played a very dangerous game with a brilliant accountant, and you lost everything." Vivian collapsed forward onto the table, burying her face in her arms, as a guttural scream tore from her throat. Marcus curled back into a ball on the floor, weeping uncontrollably as the true weight of their greed crushed them completely. They had walked into this courthouse expecting to steal a massive multi-million-dollar fortune. Now they had absolutely $0. They were completely disinherited. Magistrate Harrison struck his wooden gavel against the sounding block one final time. "We are officially adjourned," he announced, his voice cutting through the sounds of Vivian and Marcus sobbing. The judge stood up, gathered his heavy robes, and walked briskly out of the courtroom toward his private chambers, leaving the ruined family behind. David packed his briefcase, giving me a quiet nod of profound respect. We had done exactly what we came to do. But the consequences for my stepmother and her deeply corrupt children were far from over. Before Vivian could even lift her head from the wooden table, the heavy double doors at the back of the courtroom swung open. The rhythmic clicking of dress shoes echoed on the marble floor. Two tall men wearing dark gray suits and identical grim expressions walked down the center aisle. They did not look like local Chicago police officers or court bailiffs. They walked with the absolute authority of the federal government. They bypassed the gallery entirely and marched straight toward the petitioner's table, where Vivian and Marcus were still paralyzed by their total financial ruin. Marcus looked up from the floor, his tear-stained face freezing in fresh terror as the two men stopped right beside him. "Are you Vivian Washington and Marcus Washington?" the taller agent asked, pulling a leather badge wallet from his breast pocket and flipping it open. The gold shield gleamed under the harsh fluorescent lights of the courtroom. "I am Special Agent Miller with the Federal Bureau of Investigation. We are here to officially take you into federal custody." Vivian gasped, clutching the edge of the table as if it could somehow anchor her to a reality that no longer existed. "Federal custody," she repeated, her voice a fragile, terrified whisper. "You cannot do this. The judge said he was referring the case to the district attorney. We have not even had a trial yet. Please, I am a widow. I am a respected member of my church community. There must be some kind of mistake. Agent Miller did not flinch. His expression remained entirely stoic. The local district attorney will handle your state-level perjury and forgery charges, Mum, he explained, his tone completely void of emotion. However, the $200,000 you successfully stole from the Washington Family Trust was transferred from a bank in Illinois to a luxury rehabilitation facility located in California. When fraudulent funds cross state lines via electronic wire, it immediately becomes a major federal crime. You are being charged with interstate wire fraud, federal conspiracy, and financial embezzlement. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. The second agent reached down and grabbed Marcus by the arm, hauling the sobbing grown man up from the floor and forcefully turning him around. The sharp metallic click of handcuffs echoing in the quiet room sounded like a vault door slamming shut on their futures. Just as the agent finished reading Vivian, her Miranda rights, the side door leading to the courthouse holding cells opened. Two local bailiffs escorted Chloe back into the main courtroom to process her transfer. The arrogant, entitled woman who had proudly crashed my apartment and threatened me at a country club was completely gone. Her expensive designer blouse was wrinkled and stained with her own tears. Her perfectly styled blonde hair was a chaotic mess. The heavy metal handcuffs secured her wrists tightly behind her back. Agent Miller turned to look at her. "And you must be Chloe Washington," he said, stepping toward her. "We will be taking over your custody from the local authorities. You are being transferred directly to a federal holding facility to await your arraignment for your role in this interstate wire fraud conspiracy." Chloe stopped walking, her eyes darting frantically around the room. She saw Vivian weeping silently at the table, her hands secured firmly behind her back. She saw Marcus standing against the wall, completely broken and refusing to even look at her. She realized in that exact moment that her wealthy lifestyle, her country club status, and her freedom were permanently erased. Her fake medical diagnosis had destroyed her cousin, and her greed had destroyed her marriage. Then her panicked eyes landed on me. I was standing calmly near the defense table, buttoning my suit jacket and preparing to walk out into the fresh Chicago air. Chloe lunged forward, pulling against the grip of the federal agents holding her arms. "Kendra," she screamed, her voice cracking with raw, desperate terror. "Kendra, please wait. You have to stop them. You have to tell them it was all a terrible misunderstanding." I stopped walking and turned to look at her. I did not smile and I did not gloat. I simply watched the federal agents step forward to take full control of her. "Kendra, please, you have all the money now," Chloe begged, tears streaming down her ruined face as Agent Miller grabbed her arm. "You can hire the best lawyers for us. You can drop the civil charges. We are family, Kendra. We are sisters. Please do not let them put me in a federal prison. I will never survive in there. You have to help your sister." I picked up my leather briefcase and looked her directly in the eyes. I felt absolutely nothing for the woman who had tried to lock me in a psychiatric ward. "I am an only child," I replied, my voice perfectly calm and completely cold. I turned my back on her, leaving the chaotic courtroom behind. I pushed through the heavy wooden doors and walked out into the bright, crisp Chicago afternoon. The cool air filled my lungs, and for the first time in 3 months I felt entirely free. The suffocating weight of my toxic family was finally gone. But my work for the day was not quite finished. I walked down the marble steps, pulled my phone from my pocket, and made 2 very important phone calls. The first was to the premier commercial locksmith in the city. The second was to a private security firm I had kept on retainer since the reading of my father's will. I drove my car directly to the Washington family estate. It was a sprawling brick mansion sitting on 2 acres of perfectly manicured land. This was the house my father built with his own hands and his own brilliant mind. It was the house Vivian believed she was entitled to simply by playing the role of a dutiful wife. When I pulled into the wide circular driveway, the security team was already waiting. 4 large men wearing black tactical uniforms stood near their unmarked vehicles. The locksmith arrived 10 minutes later. I instructed him to completely replace every single deadbolt biometric scanner and electronic keypad on the entire property. The security team began patrolling the perimeter, ensuring every window and side door was completely secured. While the professionals locked down the exterior, I walked inside and headed straight upstairs to the master bedroom. Vivian had spent the last 3 months redecorating this room with expensive custom furniture, using my father's hard-earned money. I found her massive collection of designer luggage in the walk-in closet. I did not fold her clothes or pack her expensive perfumes carefully. I simply grabbed handfuls of her silk dresses, cashmere sweaters, and luxury shoes, tossing them haphazardly into the open suitcases. I zipped the bags shut, dragging them one by one down the grand, sweeping staircase. I hauled them out the heavy mahogany front doors and left them sitting directly on the green grass of the front lawn. I stood on the massive front porch, leaning against the white pillars, and waited. It took exactly 2 hours for the yellow taxicab to slowly pull into the long driveway. Vivian had been temporarily released on her own recognizance pending her formal federal arraignment hearing next week. She stepped out of the cab looking completely exhausted and entirely defeated. The polished church lady mask was permanently gone. Her navy blue suit was wrinkled and her hair was completely unraveled. She paid the driver and turned toward the house. She stopped dead in her tracks when she saw the 4 private security guards standing silently on the front porch. Then her eyes darted down to the massive pile of designer luggage scattered carelessly across the immaculate green lawn. She looked up and saw me standing near the heavy wooden doors, holding a single piece of paper in my hand. "What is this?" she demanded, her voice shaking with a pathetic mixture of exhaustion and residual arrogance. "You cannot legally lock me out of my own home, Kendra. I am still your late father's legal widow. You have absolutely no right to do this to me." I walked slowly down the brick steps, stopping just a few feet away from her. I looked at the pathetic woman who had spent decades trying to make me feel small and unworthy. "You lost the right to call this your home the exact moment you forged a federal banking document," I replied, my voice echoing coldly across the quiet, manicured lawn. "The irrevocable trust now has full unilateral control over this entire property. Since you triggered the penalty clause, you are legally classified as an unauthorized trespasser. If you step foot on that porch, my security team will immediately have you arrested for criminal trespassing, and that will certainly complicate your pending federal indictment." Vivian stared at me, her jaw trembling as the absolute reality of her situation finally set in completely. She had no money. She had no lawyer. She had no family left to manipulate. "But where am I supposed to go?" she whimpered, her voice finally breaking into a genuine tone of absolute despair. "I do not have a single dollar to my name. All of my credit cards were linked to the primary estate accounts. You have frozen everything." I reached out and handed her the single piece of paper I had been holding. "Here is a comprehensive list," I told her coldly. I printed out the names and addresses of the top 5 free homeless shelters currently operating in the greater Chicago area. "You should start walking right now, Vivian. You should start walking right now, Vivian." I turned my back on her and walked to my car without waiting for a response. I started the engine and drove away, watching her shrink in my rearview mirror until she was nothing more than a pathetic speck on the pristine landscape. I spent the rest of the afternoon working from my downtown apartment, organizing the massive transition of the estate assets. The sun had completely set, painting the Chicago skyline in deep shades of purple and gold, when my cell phone suddenly buzzed on the granite kitchen island. I glanced at the glowing screen. The caller ID displayed a generic toll-free number. I accepted the call and pressed the speaker button. An automated metallic voice echoed through my quiet kitchen. "You have a prepaid collect call from an inmate at the Cook County Correctional Facility. Press 1 to accept." I pressed the button and leaned against the counter. A loud, frantic breathing filled the line before a voice finally spoke. "Kendra, please do not hang up." Marcus begged, his voice echoing off the concrete walls of whatever miserable holding cell he was currently occupying. "Please listen to me. It is Marcus." I did not respond immediately. I just let him sit in the agonizing silence, listening to the background noises of the county jail. I could hear men shouting, metal doors slamming, and the harsh reality of his new life closing in around him. "Hello, Marcus," I finally replied, my voice completely calm. "How was your first afternoon in federal holding?" "It is an absolute nightmare, Kendra," he sobbed, his voice cracking with sheer terror. "You have no idea what it is like in here. It is freezing cold and it smells like bleach and sweat. The guards treat us like stray animals. Chloe is in a completely different facility and I cannot reach her. I am totally alone, Kendra. You have to get me out of here. Please, you have to pay my bail." The judge set the bond amount, and I know the estate has the liquid cash to cover it immediately. I walked over to my refrigerator, poured myself a glass of cold water, and took a slow sip. "You want me to post your bail, Marcus?" I asked, letting the absurdity of his request hang in the air. "After you actively conspired to lock me in a psychiatric ward so you could steal my inheritance. You want me to write a check to secure your freedom." "I was brainwashed," Marcus cried, his desperation making him sound like a frightened child. "Mom and Chloe completely manipulated me. You heard what I said in court, Kendra. I confessed to everything. I told the judge the absolute truth. I am the victim here too. We are blood, Kendra. We are family. Think about our father. Think about the legacy he built for us. He would not want his only son sitting in a filthy jail cell facing federal wire fraud charges. He loved us both. You have to honor his memory and protect the family name. I am begging you on my knees, do not leave me in here to rot." The sheer audacity of him invoking my father's name sent a brief flash of anger through my chest, but I quickly suppressed it. I operate on logic, not emotion. I set my glass down on the counter. "You do not get to speak about our father's legacy. Marcus," I told him, my tone dropping to a cold, unforgiving register. "Our father built an empire through hard work and honesty. You tried to dismantle it with forgery and theft. You did not confess today because you felt guilty. You confessed because you were terrified of getting caught. There is a massive difference between genuine remorse and the fear of consequences." "But I can change," Marcus pleaded, weeping openly into the receiver. "I swear I will change. Just wire the bail money, Kendra. It is only $250,000. That is absolutely nothing to the trust. You will not even notice it is gone. Please just transfer the funds." I opened my laptop and pulled up the real-time financial dashboard. "I actually did look at the bail requirements earlier today, Marcus," I stated flatly. "And you are correct. The trust currently holds more than enough liquid capital to cover your bond. In fact, I authorized a withdrawal for that exact mathematical amount just 20 minutes ago." "Oh, thank God." Marcus gasped, a massive wave of relief flooding his voice. "Thank you, Kendra. When will the wire clear the system?" "It is not going to the jail, Marcus," I replied. "I did not pay your bail. I used it to buy out your shares." I hung up. I hung up the phone and let the quiet isolation of my apartment wash over me. That single sharp click of the receiver was the final, definitive sound of their utter defeat. I walked away from the kitchen counter, leaving the phone sitting in the dark, and finally allowed myself to breathe. 6 months passed since that chaotic afternoon in the federal courtroom. The wheels of the United States justice system are notoriously slow, but when powered by irrefutable forensic data, they grind with absolute terrifying precision. My comprehensive audit had triggered an unstoppable legal avalanche that completely leveled their lives, erasing their arrogant entitlement permanently. Chloe Washington is currently residing at a federal correctional institution on the East Coast. Her exclusive country club memberships and custom designer wardrobe were aggressively traded for standard-issue khaki jumpsuits and a highly regulated daily schedule. She desperately tried to leverage her wealthy social connections to secure a lighter sentence during her trial, but the presiding federal judge was completely immune to her manufactured white tears. Because she was the documented mastermind behind the fraudulent shell companies, the fake charity gala, and the forged medical affidavits, she received a mandatory 5-year federal sentence without the possibility of early parole. The arrogant woman who once hosted lavish elite gatherings using my father's stolen money now spends her afternoons scrubbing stainless steel cafeteria trays and mopping linoleum floors for exactly 13 cents an hour. Marcus eventually took his cowardly plea deal, testifying against his own wife and mother to save his own skin. He is currently serving a 3-year sentence in a state facility completely cut off from the corporate business he tried to steal. I legally absorbed his remaining shares into the primary trust, completely purging his name from the company roster. But Vivian's fall from grace was undeniably the most spectacular and poetic justice of them all. She managed to barely avoid a federal prison sentence by accepting a brutal plea agreement. The deal required her to completely surrender every single hidden asset she possessed, including the illegal offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands she had so desperately tried to conceal from the IRS. The government seized everything, leaving her entirely destitute. Furthermore, her beloved church community, the exact same congregation she had maliciously weaponized against me on that Sunday morning, completely turned their backs on her. When the official court transcripts and federal indictments became public record, the congregation was horrified. Pastor Miller actually dedicated an entire Sunday morning sermon to the destructive nature of unchecked greed and deceit, using Vivian's public downfall as the ultimate cautionary tale. With her high society reputation permanently destroyed and absolutely zero money to fall back on, she had no choice but to find grueling manual labor just to survive the harsh Chicago winter. If you drive down to the industrial district on the south side of the city at 3 in the morning, you will find my former stepmother working the graveyard shift at a 24-hour coin-operated laundromat. The proud woman who firmly believed she was entitled to a multi-million-dollar estate now spends her long, miserable nights sweeping up spilled chemical detergent and folding the cheap clothes of total strangers under the flickering, buzzing glow of cheap fluorescent lights. The financial battlefield was finally clear. It was a crisp Tuesday afternoon in late October when I drove out to the Oak Woods Cemetery. The autumn leaves were turning brilliant shades of gold and crimson, falling gently across the manicured lawns. I walked along the quiet paved path until I reached my father's plot. His polished black granite headstone stood tall and pristine, reflecting the pale afternoon sun. I stood there for a long time, just enjoying the absolute peace of the moment. There were no more lies to mathematically uncover, no more hidden accounts to aggressively track, and no more toxic family members to fight. I reached into the deep pocket of my wool coat and pulled out a heavy object, wrapped carefully in a dark velvet cloth. It was my father's vintage gold Rolex watch. During the final stages of the estate asset audit, I discovered that Marcus had secretly fenced the watch weeks before the will was even read, hoping to secure some quick, untraceable cash to pay off Chloe's dealers. It took my legal team 2 months and the direct threat of additional federal fencing charges, but I successfully clawed the heirloom back from a shady high-end pawnbroker operating in the Diamond District. I stepped forward and carefully placed the gleaming gold timepiece directly onto the top of the cold granite headstone. The sweeping second hand ticked smoothly, forming a perfect mechanical heartbeat in the quiet cemetery. I kept my promise, Dad. I said, my voice steady and completely at peace in the autumn air. I protected the empire you built, and I will never let anyone take it away. I turned away from the black granite headstone and walked back to my car, leaving the cemetery and my toxic family firmly in the past. Today I sit behind a massive slab of polished mahogany, in a sprawling corner office overlooking the very same Chicago skyline that once served as the backdrop for their pathetic courtroom theatrics. The morning sun pours through the floor to ceiling glass windows, warming the heavy leather of my executive chair. The Washington Family Trust is no longer just a defensive stronghold protecting my father's assets from greedy hands. It is a thriving, expanding financial empire, and I am the sole architect of its future. I spend my days managing a multi-million-dollar portfolio, making aggressive corporate acquisitions, and ensuring that the legacy my father built continues to grow exponentially. There is no more hiding in the shadows of my stepmother's loud, obnoxious demands. There are no more fake wellness coaches knocking on my apartment door or forged medical documents threatening my freedom. There is only the quiet, deeply satisfying hum of total control. When I look back at the chaotic sequence of events that led me to this executive chair, the most glaring mistake my family made was a simple, arrogant miscalculation of character. Vivian, Marcus, and Chloe all operated under the exact same fatal delusion. They genuinely believed that my silence was a symptom of inherent weakness. They thought because I did not scream in the middle of church services or throw violent temper tantrums in elite country clubs that I was somehow incapable of fighting back. Toxic people always rely on volume and theatrical manipulation to control the narrative. They assume that if they yell loud enough, cry hard enough, and perform for the right audience, the truth will simply bend to their will. They are so accustomed to bulldozing over emotionally vulnerable people that they completely short-circuit when they encounter an immovable object. But the truth does not care about your volume. The truth only cares about the receipts. They underestimated me because I am a forensic accountant. They thought my entire existence was confined to boring spreadsheets and dusty corporate ledgers. They failed to realize that when you spend your life tracking every single penny flowing through a complex financial ecosystem, you learn exactly how to spot a lie from a mile away. You learn how to patiently build an ironclad fortress of facts while your enemies are busy building a fragile house of cards. I let them construct their elaborate trap. I let them forge the banking signatures, bribe the disgraced doctors, and plan their luxurious charity galas. I simply stood back and let them hand me the exact weapons I needed to mathematically execute them in a federal courtroom. I did not need to raise my voice because the numbers were already screaming the truth. Now I own my narrative completely. Nobody gets to tell me who I am or what I am capable of achieving. I am not the crazy stepdaughter having a psychotic break. I am not a helpless victim waiting for a manipulative sister-in-law in a designer dress to manage my life. I am the woman who dismantled a criminal conspiracy using nothing but bank statements, routing numbers, and absolute patience. I took the very tools they tried to use against me and turned them into a flawless legal guillotine. The peace I feel in this office is absolute. I no longer have to check my security cameras for fake police wellness checks. I do not have to endure agonizing Sunday dinners listening to Vivian publicly pray for my downfall while she secretly funnels cash into offshore accounts. I excised the cancer from this family tree, and the roots are finally healthy enough to thrive. I hold the fully audited trust documents in my hands, and I know my father would be incredibly proud of the guardian I have become. Every time I look out over the city, I smile knowing exactly where they all ended up. Their arrogance was their ultimate undoing, and my meticulous ledger was the very thing that permanently sealed their fate. They thought they could lock me in a ward, but instead, I locked them in a cell. Have you ever had to use cold, hard facts to destroy a family member's lies? Drop your stories in the comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel, and remember, never try to outmath a forensic accountant. The power of objective truth over emotional reactivity. Toxic individuals often rely on manufactured chaos, emotional manipulation, and sheer volume to overwhelm their targets. In the story, Vivian, Chloe, and Marcus used aggressive gaslighting, public shaming, and fake police wellness checks to intentionally trigger a reactive response from Kendra. Their strategy was textbook manipulation, push the target to their absolute breaking point, and then use their justified anger as proof of their instability. The most profound lesson to draw from Kendra's victory is that emotional regulation and objective truth are your greatest weapons against gaslighting. Silence is not weakness. Manipulators expect you to loudly defend yourself. By refusing to engage in their theatrical screaming matches, Kendra deprived them of the emotional ammunition they desperately needed to build their false narrative. Facts destroy the fog of lies. Toxic behavior thrives in the ambiguity of he said, she said arguments. Kendra anchored herself entirely in verifiable reality, relying on bank routing numbers, high-definition security footage, and ironclad legal clauses. When confronted with deceit in our own lives, our natural instinct is often to fight fire with fire. We want to shout our innocence and demand justice loudly. However, true power lies in stepping back and letting the facts do the heavy lifting. A meticulously built fortress of truth will always outlast a fragile house of cards built on lies. Kendra's journey teaches us that you do not need to out-yell a manipulator. You simply need to out-prepare them. Stay grounded, keep your receipts, and never let someone else's chaos dictate your reality. If this story resonated with you, take a moment to evaluate your own boundaries and start documenting the objective truth in your life today.